Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon to those joining us from a distance via live stream. Welcome to our conversation with Robert Suderman, or as we would like to more affectionately say, Jack Suderman. It's an honor to have both Jack and Irene here from Winnipeg, or here in Winnipeg, typically from southwestern Ontario. Here for several months volunteering with Mennonite Church Canada. It's good that we can do this launch together with you in person. My name is Arlen. I'm the director of Common Word, a national Anabaptist bookstore and library jointly operated by Mennonite Church Canada and Canadian Mennonite University. Bookstore and library that hosts about 16,000 resources, carefully selected resources that are of Anabaptist and related origins. It's our privilege to be hosting this conversation. For those of you participating online, I invite you to send a chat message and with your name and location so that we know who is joining us. Later in the program, there will be a question and answer time with Jack. And those online can send a comment or question by chat, and I will attend to those while facilitating that part of the conversation. The book, The Baby and the Bathwater, is a book for the church about the church. It's Jack's life's teaching in under 90 pages. Accessible, timely, instructive, encouraging, and poignant. An ecclesiology for the people. Before it was even in print, strong support was given from many corners of the wider church. The 23 endorsements at the back of the book read a bit like a who's who in the wider Anabaptist and ecumenical community. From Mennonite, Church of the Brethren, Anglican, Lutheran, Reformed, Episcopal, Catholic, Orthodox, leaders and writers in Burkina Faso, Rome, Philippines, Albania, England, India, the United States, and Canada. Many from this esteemed group are likely present with us now via live stream or will watch the recording later. Welcome and thank you. We're grateful for the wide exposure Jack's writing has been given. Additionally, donations for the circulation of this book were received prior to its printing. So consequently, we've been fortunate to be able to circulate it widely to Mennonite Church Canada pastors and Mennonite Church USA pastors who have requested it for free. Again, we're grateful for such a generous endorsement. And let me just say a quick further word about how to access the book. Physical copies are available at commonword.ca to buy or within Canada to borrow. And pastors, as I said, can request a free copy. In the United States, the Anabaptist Mennonite Biblical Seminary bookstore is also distributing it. And for those of you outside North America, a free PDF version is readable or downloadable online at commonword.ca. And I've put this information and the direct link on the chat. Now, we're in for a good conversation. In addition to speaking himself and giving us an inside scoop on the book, Jack has invited several other guests to speak tonight who each contributed to the publication. And we're grateful that they're all present, able to be here in person. Ray Dirks as illustrator, Moses Falco and Janet Plenert as two of the afterword authors, and Doug Clausen, who wrote the foreword. Doug is the current Mennonite Church Canada Executive Minister and will MC tonight's proceedings and will introduce each guest a bit more fully. Doug will also say more about his own connection with Jack and a bit about Mennonite Church Canada's support as publisher and project sponsor. Doug, welcome.
The seeds of inspiration for the publication of this book were planted in October of 1993 when a bomb went off in the city of Bogota, Colombia. At the time, I was in the company of several other youth ministers from across Canada and the US on a learning tour of Colombia, visiting the people and places where the Mennonite church was growing and thriving. Our group arrived in Bogota, then declared to be one of the most violent cities in the world at the time. At the time, it was experiencing an average of 16 violent deaths per day, only a tiny percentage of which were ever investigated. Soldiers with machine guns lined the walls of the airport. Within a day or two, we arrived at the home of Jack and Irene Suderman. I knew their son Brian and looked forward to meeting his parents. Upon our arrival, we were generously and joyously welcomed. Irene has a way of making everyone feel like beloved family. After some wonderful food, including Colombian fruit, which is a whole new level of taste, we sat in a circle to talk about Jack's favorite subject, the church. Jack told us about his time teaching at a seminary in Bolivia. There, under dictatorship, he and others were forbidden to teach the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, because the words of Jesus contain ideas that threatened the oppressive power structures of the country. Not deterred, Jack taught the students the reasons why he couldn't teach them about the Sermon on the Mount. Then he began to tell us about the project of establishing a Mennonite seminary in Colombia, and that he and other leaders were working on. And as he spoke, we heard a loud kaboom. And Jack kept talking. The rest of us began looking out the corner of our eyes at each other. And finally, seeing that we were a little distracted, Jack paused to say, "That was probably just a bomb going off at the university across the street." So as I was saying, and he kept going, looking momentarily at Irene and Jack, I thought to myself, who are these people? They live in a country racked with violence from decades-long struggle between government and guerrilla groups fueled by drug trafficking. They are living in a city where you're told not to run down the sidewalk because people around you will think that somebody's going to get shot. They're working in a church where a prominent church leader was gunned down, and the leader of the Justice and Peace Arm was recently evacuated to the USA because his name appeared published in death threat lists. They're visiting congregations where ushers in some of the congregations keep their eyes open for kidnappers that are lurking. And I had just come from a series of church meetings back home where members were strongly objecting to the new hymnal because it contained 25 more unison songs than the old one. That night in the Suderman home changed my life. I encountered more people like Jack and Irene, disciples of Jesus later that week and on from there, who not only spoke about the Sermon on the Mount, but lived the dreams and dangers of it day to day. When the Sudermans returned to Canada, Jack began his work as executive staff member in what would become Mennonite Church Canada. In his writing, his teaching, and his preaching, Jack became to Mennonite Church Canada what Leslie Newbigin was to the broader Christian church. Amid the impact of fundamentalist and revivalist preaching that had left its mark on Mennonites, Jack led a quest to recover an understanding of the people of God, as articulated in 1 Peter 2:9 and 10, as God's chosen vehicle for proclaiming healing and hope for the world, and to be faithful to that call in our time. So, fast forward almost 2 years ago now, when I heard Jack mention that he was working on a little book about the church, the seeds of inspiration had grown to produce fruit before us that needed to be shared in not just his family, and not just the nationwide church, but the global church. 23 persons, as Arlen said, provided endorsements for the book, no arm twisting whatsoever. They were all eager. Mennonite Church Canada's executive staff group thought it would be great if we could have 3 persons complement Jack's work by writing afterwards. Moses Falco, pastor at Sterling Mennonite Fellowship here in Winnipeg, was an obvious choice, given his character and keenness for the witness of the church. Janet Plenert, former executive director of International Witness for MC Canada, Janet, who worked tirelessly with Jack on creating the vision for becoming the missional church that we are nationwide. And Cynthia Peacock of India, who humbly said that there was nothing that she could say that could enhance this project, but consented to a Zoom call with me anyway. Her insights were and are profound, as you will read in the afterword. And then the final piece. At one point, Jack said, "You know, if we had an illustrator, someone as talented as Ray Dirks, the images described in the book would come to life." An email was sent, a phone call was made, and here we are. We are so grateful that all of them graciously consented, Ray, Moses, and Janet, to not only participate, and Cynthia, but Ray, Moses, and Janet could be here tonight. We're so thankful. Cynthia will likely watch this in the morning, as it's really early in the morning in India right now. So I'll invite Ray, then Moses, and Janet to come forward in that order. Let's welcome them.
Well, Jack and I both worked here with Mennonite Church Canada for a number of years, and I don't think we ever had as rich a time together as we had emailing back and forth about this book. And I feel like, for me, the best thing about having worked on this project was that I could get to know Jack a bit better, and he could get to know me a whole lot better. It was something I wasn't necessarily expecting, but something I really cherish to this day. It was an honor to be asked. I am someone who typically works from stories, personal experiences with people from other cultures and other countries, staying with them for a period of time, observing their lives, trying to document their daily lives, etc. That's what I'm comfortable with, being asked to be on a project like this. I was honored to be asked. I was a little bit uncomfortable about what I would do as an artist. What I did do was, Jack's indicated right away that there would be this woodcut on the cover. So I decided I would do my own sort of scribble version of the same illustration as my first illustration. And it's what I do is I just do a drawing and then I kind of make sure I'm not terribly steady with my hand when I'm inking it in. So it looks realistic, but it's also kind of scribbled at the same time. And as I went along, I read the book just straight, and then I reread it, keeping the names of each chapter in mind and trying to think and pick out little phrases that maybe piqued my interest or brought some vision into my head. And that's basically how I came about getting to do all of these illustrations. But like I said, the first one was this one. And then I ended it at the appendix. I was trying to figure out what I would do there. I wanted somehow to bring this image back into, sort of to bring it full circle. And I picked up on a line from Janet's words. "We will need to tend it day after day." I took the cover image and put it into caring hands and the image being held lovingly. And you don't see that here because I figured I'd already done this once, so I photoshopped it into this. But thank you very much.
Good evening. It is great to be here for those of you in person here and joining online as well. It is wonderful to be together in this space. My name is Moses Falco. I'm a pastor at Sterling Mennonite Fellowship in Winnipeg, and I've been privileged to be pastoring there for 6 years, to be part of the Mennonite Church for 10 years. And before that, I came from the Baptist tradition, so a little bit of ecumenicalism there as well. You know, I got this invitation to write an afterword for Jack's book right around the time that my wife Jessica and I became parents. And I could already at that point affirm that to throw the baby out with the bathwater was a bad idea. I also learned during that time that being a dad, you can get away with so many dad jokes. It is wonderful. You know, as nice as Doug's introduction was, I was honored, shocked, perplexed that I would be asked to write a piece for Jack's book. I mean, honestly, like, I'm a nobody, so why would I be asked to do this? Or even to come here and speak, and it just kept going in my head, well, what do I even say? You know, coming here this evening to, of course I want to endorse this book, but I don't just want to repeat what I've written in the afterword. I don't know what to say. And then I thought, well, maybe I should use this chance to say something maybe a little bit provocative. You know, Jack is kind of this larger-than-life character in the church, in the Mennonite church, and me as a nobody now has this chance, this platform to say something, and I'm going to say something that I hope is not taken in the wrong way. But Jack, I think in the end, your book, as good, as brilliant as it is, this evening, as lovely as it is, it's not going to matter. And I hope you don't take this in the wrong way, because I think we should all buy this book. I think we need to have this book in our churches. I think this book is immensely important. But over the past year, after I have written the afterword, or one of the afterwords to this book, our church has gone through some difficult stuff. We as a church are still, 10 years in, talking about what it means to live out our sexuality in a faithful way. And you know what? We don't always agree. And often feelings get hurt. And sometimes people even walk away. And the hardest thing for a pastor is to learn that someone in their church does not feel welcomed. When we talk about ecclesiology, I think the most important thing, what really matters in the end, is what we actually do, how we actually live out this calling to be the church. So don't take it the wrong way, Jack. Not that your book isn't important. I think it's immensely important. But it's important in the same way that a playbook or a strategy book is important to a team. The way we shape our ecclesiology is going to make all the difference in how we live it out. And what Jack has done here is try to, in a short, succinct, compact way as possible, ignite our imaginations for how we can actually do the work of living out our calling as the church. And so I think, Jack, your book is so important for us because there's so many things that we sometimes get confused with. That the church is something we own, that it's some kind of social club to be a member of, that it's something that I could just do by myself. And yet in this book, you remind us what it actually means to live out being the church. That the church actually belongs to God. That the church is God's way of accomplishing the gospel in this world. And that the church is only the church when we find ourselves intertwined with the person of Jesus Christ. So I would encourage everybody, all of us, those watching, and anyone who hears this, to pick up this book. Because this is the kind of book that can radically change and inform and instruct us as we actually do the work. The hard, the heartbreaking, but also the exciting and invigorating work of being the church. Thank you.
Thank you. It is wonderful to be here this evening. It was certainly a privilege to be invited to participate in this. And it was a joy for me because Jack and I and a few other people that are here tonight have spent many years working together in projects here at Mennonite Church Canada, but also around the world in Mennonite World Conference and other venues. So it's a privilege to be here. I've always known that Jack is a pretty interesting fellow. He's probably the wisest person I know, although, he sometimes has some humor that takes us in strange directions. He's a brilliant ecclesiologist, if that is a word. And one of the gifts I've always noticed about him and appreciated is that he takes massively complex things and reduces them into things that are accessible, simple, but never simplistic. And I think the book that we have before us today is a really great example of that. Jesus was an institutionalizer. Quote from Jack Suderman in the chapter called A Closer Look at Ecclesia, or the Church. When we were at Mennonite Church Canada together, Jack was known to say, well, if something's worth doing, it's worth institutionalizing. I'm seeing nodding heads of people who've heard that from him. It's an interesting concept. He reminds us in this book that to institutionalize is to create capacity to implement and to repeat something. And Jesus, as we know, did many things worth repeating. The bread and the wine that we were instructed to remember and to repeat, caring for one another, loving one another, breaking down barriers, prayer, worship, baptizing, teaching, creating transformed, reconciled communities. Kingdom-building things are what Jesus wants us to continue doing. It's what he lived for and ultimately died for. Jack says, every spirituality requires flesh for its existence. There is no non-institutionalized church. And yet, institution has become kind of a bad word in our culture and our day. So every gathering of God's people throughout history has adopted contextual rhythms and structures and functions and forms that help it continue the teaching of Jesus. They have institutionalized in the best of senses. Jack, I think throughout the whole book, but he starts it in this chapter that I'm referring to, shows us the untenable nature of claiming Jesus and rejecting the church. The institution of the church may need reform. It obviously needs to be refreshed and revitalized at times. But the church is essentially based on the transforming presence of a loving, breathing Spirit, our God. It's based on a God of transformation, of hope, and of love. It is profound, it is inspirational and aspirational. It is the baby that we cannot throw out with the bathwater. And Jack helps us to see that in this small book. And I think that's a really, really significant thing in a world where people want to get rid of or distrust or not have loyalty to institution. We need to rethink the church in that way. Now, I confess that when I opened the book, I read the preliminary things. I had already read, of course, the electronic version before I wrote my afterword. But when I got the book in my hand, I opened and I read the foreword and I looked at the table of contents and I smiled and I said, "Yep, this is a Jack book." When have you ever seen what others say or endorsements listed in a table of contents? Usually that's 3 or 4 blurbs on a back cover. But as has been referred to, there were so many endorsements that it was worthy of being in the table of contents in a section, and it takes up 8 pages in the book. Doug mentioned, Arlen mentioned, that these come from Burkina Faso and Albania and Rome and all over the place, Philippines and India. And we see leaders from the World Council of Churches and the Global Christian Forum. Big church thinkers in the world are endorsing this book. What does that mean? Well, I think it's important because it signals that in spite of the brevity and the easy-to-read nature of this book, it packs a powerful punch that is relevant across a wide geographic and religious swath. It is a book to be studied, read, pondered, and struggled with all around the world. Jack speaks keenly to the church in the world today, in today's world and situation, and I believe we are wise to take it to heart. Thank you.
Thank you and good evening, and thank you for coming out on a warm, beautiful fall day. I can't imagine being like this in Manitoba. Thank you for all the kind words, most of them surely exaggerated. Thank you to Doug and Moses and Janet, and also to the folks online. I know Cynthia, the other afterward writer, is either watching or will be, and many others. So we appreciate your time and your interest in this. Thanks also to Doug and your staff, Arlen, and the gang here, to Daryl in the back. Appreciate that very much. The baby and the bathwater. This is a simple, humble, modest little book. It's not even 100 pages, although it is 99. But it has a big heart. It is an appeal to those who are discouraged, downhearted, even angry with the church, for good reasons. We don't downplay the importance of what has happened. And it's an appeal to try to give it another chance. Not because of what the church is or ever has been, but because of what it is meant to be and meant to become. It is hopefully encouraging to those in the church, to its leadership, to its people like you and I, and all the people we know. It's a bit like marriage or parenting. We continue to get married, not because we finally mastered the art of married life, but because it's worth trying. We don't have children. We have children not because after years of trying we finally know how to parent, but because children teach us how to live better and love more and make life richer. And they energize our trying. The book tries to model, this has already been mentioned, the book tries to model what it is pointing to. This is not a Suderman vision of the church, and I want to make sure that we understand this. At least I hope it's not. First of all, it's enriched, as we've already noticed, by the giftedness of people like Ray Dirks, who teaches more theology through his pencil than most of us do through our pen. It's enriched by stories from Doug Clausen as leader of our national denomination. It's enriched by folks, practitioners and others, Janet and Moses and Cynthia, who can take this and try to see what does it mean for us, and the wisdom of experience. The book gathers the wisdom from others, as has already been mentioned, from around the globe, from different churches, different church experiences, ecumenical settings. But most of all, the book, I hope, tries to be true to the vision found in our scripture for what it means to be God's people. And when we look at that, it is an amazing, incredible, vivid, literally breathtaking experience to see the design for the church as outlined in our scriptures. And this vision, not mine, not yours, this vision found in scripture is my main interest. And the only thing I hope for is that what I've done, what I've written, is close enough to what is there. I know it's not complete, but I hope it somewhat points us in the right direction, because it's an incredible, really, really outstanding, integral work that is outlined there. And so this is my main interest. I hope it can help us uncover that vision. It can help us recover it, expose it, and allow it to inspire our faithfulness again. The vision is to be God, a people of God. And this is central to Scripture, from Genesis to Revelation. And it is second only, I think, to the passion that God has to restore creation, to reconcile the world. But that passion to reconcile the world is always seen as being done through people, through peoplehood, which later came to be known as the church. So I hope that that vision can still touch lives. I hope it can transform us. It can function, I think, a bit like a North Star. Like a North Star functions to a sailor who is caught in a hurricane. For a moment, or maybe a week, or a day, or 5 days, you lose sight of it, and you lose your way, and you go offline, and you get lost, and you're off course. But when the storm passes, we can again look up and we can see that star, and we can again reorient our direction, and it can save us. It can save us literally from death, and it can help us get to where we want to go. That star is still there in spite of the storm and in spite of the hurricanes and the winds. So I think that that is one of the purposes, the values of focusing on a vision that is well beyond our capacity to accomplish. I am not aware of any time in history when the church has ever fulfilled the vision that is outlined for it in Scripture. Not even in the New Testament, not even in the early church. I'm not aware of any decade, of any century, where the church has fully accomplished what is set out for it in Scripture. And it certainly isn't doing that now. The 21st century is no exception to that. But the value of a vision is not to get discouraged when we fall off the wagon, but to get encouraged by how many people try to get on. Today, through the last 20 centuries, and much before that. So thank you again for coming, for tuning in to this live stream. I appreciate it very deeply. I hope you find the booklet useful for yourself and for your communities that you come from. Christmas is coming, a perfect gift for Christmas. I had to put that in somewhere. May God richly bless each one. Thank you very much.
We're going to take some time for question and answer from folks here. I will repeat the questions or comments that you might say so that those at a distance can hear them. And those of you who are at home or watching this online, please chat your question or comment, and I will try to follow that and insert that into the conversation. So Jack is up here so he can respond to any kind of comment or question you might have. Let's take a bit of time. The live stream is about 20 seconds slower than we are here live, so they're just hearing this for the first time. George.
I'm wondering, Jack, what was the biggest challenge you sort of faced in writing the book?
What was your greatest challenge in writing the book?
Well, I think Janet kind of hinted at this. The biggest challenge for me always is to pare down when I want to say so much more. It is so big, it is so important, it is so amazing that I want to keep saying more, providing more examples, giving more testimonies, quoting more. And so when you try to, well, maybe I should give a little bit of background. I didn't thank my family at the beginning. I should do that. I want to do that. First of all, Irene over here, who has been thorough, just an ongoing solid support for this, but also our family. You might not know that we have 3 sons. All of them are hard at work in teaching and so on, and they have been harping at me for years and years that I need to do something simple, short, accessible, and so the pandemic was kind of a perfect time to try to see whether I could do something. So I think that whole question of paring down something so big into something so small, is a big challenge for people like me. That's why I love the fact that Ray accepted to illustrate this book, because when you look at his illustrations, he's pared down what I have in 99 pages to even 1 page or 2. So it's brilliant, right? But it's not always my gift.
Anyone else? Doug?
Jack, as much as we've talked about this, I've never asked you where the people of God concept really, when it really gripped you. It was kind of counter to a lot of the individualism that's been around for years. I'd love to know when that gripped you, or what got you.
How did the concept of people of God, when did the concept of people of God kind of grab or grip you, and when did that come to fruition in your thinking?
Well, I do mention it just briefly in the prologue. I grew up in southern Manitoba. I grew up in Winkler in the Berchtauler Church, and we lived here. I taught school here in a Mennonite school in Westgate. But it really wasn't until we went to seminary in Elkhart where I'm sure there was a spark of interest there all the time, but it never had kind of gotten into a flame. But when we engaged the teaching and the wisdom and the scripture as taught there by the professors that we had, that's where it happened. And I say here I said our seminary experiences in the early 70s spanned a spark of interest in understanding the church into red-hot flames. It was there that I first sensed a growing gap between our Christian doctrines and their resulting ethics. And I also sensed the increased marginalization of significant ecclesiology in our way of explaining our faith. The priorities of faith that have become prevalent and increasingly dominant over the decades, by and large, do not include the church as an essential component. And I would want to give credit to my professors in the seminary for that.
David Beauchart from AMBS, from seminary.
From where?
From seminary, David Beauchart.
Oh yeah, okay.
Has written here, Jack, you have spoken of God's vision for the church as a, quote, echo of Eden and a prototype of the New Jerusalem. As you assess the church as it is today, are there particular practices that would help transform our current expression of the church into a clear embodiment of that vision? What practices?
Well, yeah, thank you, David. Good that you're watching. Well, I already mentioned it's an echo of Eden, did I say? And what? And a prototype?
Prototype of the New Jerusalem.
Prototype of the New Jerusalem. Yeah, the Bible kind of starts with this, right? It starts with a picture and it ends with a picture. And these two pictures are amazingly coherent. They have many of the same qualities, the same ideas, the same values that are held there. And so the scriptural journey takes place between these two big vision pictures. The vision of Eden and the vision of the New Jerusalem. And our task has been and continues to be to walk that road. I haven't answered his question yet, have I?
He's asking about practices.
Yeah, you're talking about practice. The other thing that I already mentioned, which partly answers the question, is that I don't believe that there ever has been a church anywhere that has fully managed to to live out in all its splendor these visions that lie before us. I don't think there ever has been, and likely never will be. What is inspiring for me, when I go around the world, or when I go around our church, or when I go around our congregation, what is inspiring to me are the many efforts to do something in that direction. And I can name you 1,000 of those, and you can too. Every one of you can name many, 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 many things that you experience or that your people experience that point in the direction of the New Jerusalem and point back to Eden. We love. We see acts of love instead of acts of hate. We try not to kill when others tell us we should. We are generous when our society tells us to be self-centered. We are compassionate when others say it's somebody else's job. We forgive when other people insist that forgiveness is not possible or that revenge is more preferable. And we see that, we experience that. These are practices that we experience every day in ourselves, in our churches, in our denominations. Not in its full, complete form, or not in its full institutional form, but certainly these are things that are worth doing again. You know, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing again. And what I see in churches across the globe is that people are trying to do these things again and again. And these are some very often very simple practices, but let me just tell you one quick story here. When we were in Chile and met with one of the largest evangelical churches in Chile, which was the Baptist Church, and they wanted to shift their second 100 years. They were just celebrating their first 100 years as Baptists. They wanted to shift their second 100 years to being Anabaptists. And they wanted to be a peace church and so on. And so we were there, and we talked to the general secretary of the denomination and asked her, so what, for you, where do you have to start in terms of practices? Where do you have to start in order to be a peace church in Chile? And her answer was, I think we have to start by we need to stop gossiping. We need to stop gossiping. That's where we can start to be a peace church. This, in a militarized country, as Doug is saying, with machine guns all over, and her answer was, let's stop gossiping. So I think the practices are daily. We do them all the time. We're just not very conscious of them often. But we have to nurture them and continue to do what we do.
I have two other questions online, and there may be others here that want to say something yet. Jan or Rick Jansen have stated, could you say something, Jack, about the role of the church as a community of internal support and accountability, as opposed to just as a motivator for external action? So what church as a community of internal support and accountability?
Well, that's certainly part of the vision, isn't it? When we talk about the North Star and what does it mean to follow or try to align with the North Star, absolutely the part of that is to commit ourselves to each other and to be accountable to each other, to carry each other's burdens, in the best way possible. And yeah, it's part of the vision. It's part of what it means to be God's people. I don't know what more I can say.
Isaiah is asking, is it dangerous at all in church or in the seminary setting to teach scriptural vision of church without also attending to the concrete, sometimes dark realities?
We must always include or even start with the dark realities. And if you notice, maybe you haven't noticed, but and I don't do a good job of this, but where did I say this? Well, I can't find it now, but you know, we can list the dark realities of the experience of the church or the action of the church throughout history. The pages are endless. The churches, the big ones, the really big ones that we often point to are, the action of the church during the time of the Crusades and what the Christians did to the Muslims, which continues to have lasting impact to this very day. Very dark. We lived in Latin America for 10 years. The dark part of the church that conquered all of Latin America with the cross and the Bible in the one hand and the sword in the other, and literally killed and murdered millions of people in the name of Christ and the name of God. Very, very dark part of the history of our church. We're experiencing it right now in Canada with the residential schools and the participation of the church in what was evil. So we don't ever not start with that. We know that, and we're aware of that, and that absolutely has to form part of our teaching and of our understanding of ecclesiology. And that's why I think it's so important to have a vision that leads us beyond that, a vision that we can look up to, and when the hurricanes come and the storms blow and we get off course and we drown or almost drown, and there's again something that can lift us up. And so my intention here is my concern is not so much that the church hasn't lived up to the vision. We know that. That's not new. My concern is that the vision itself is rapidly vanishing and evaporating before our very eyes in the 21st and the 20th century. In other words, the vision is no longer there, is no longer taught. And I have one chapter in here that talks about the 96 images of the church in the New Testament. Paul Manier, Yale University professor who has done the hard work, and he shows how the New Testament writers did the Ray Dirks thing, right? They try and try and try to communicate the purpose and the meaning of the church in visual, creative, artistic expression. And they invent 96 images that are somehow supposed to communicate some part of what it means to be this people of God. 96 just in the New Testament. That's not even counting the Old Testament. And my concern is that that we have, that those 96 ways of being the church have disappeared. Or, at best, what has happened in history is that we choose our favorites. We choose maybe 2 or 3 or 4 of those images, and we say, this is enough. You know, more than this is overwhelming for us. We can't do it. We don't have energy for it. So let's choose these 5. The problem in history has been that while I choose these 5, somebody else chooses a different 5. And then those 2 seem to conflict with each other. And that's not the intention. The intention is that these 96 are kind of like a harmonious symposium of symbols that together paint the picture or enrich the picture of what it means to be the church. And I would suspect, with all due respect to all of you, that if we would spend even half an hour trying to recapture what are those 96 images in the test right now, I suspect we wouldn't get past about 20 or 25. You know, we would all remember that it's the salt of the light, salt of the earth, and that it's the light of the city on the hill, and that this, and it's supposed to be a field and an open letter, and it's supposed to be this and that. You know, we can easily knock off, you know, the first 10 are easy. And then after that, to 20, it starts getting hard, and then to 30, it's even harder. And boy, beyond that. And so there is this wealth of creative, artistic, dynamic effort by the New Testament writers to make it easy for us to understand, easier for us to understand what it means to be the church. But I think it is so overwhelming that we have talked about paring down. You know, we have pared down to maybe 3 or 4 or 5, like community, or family, or body. And then we lose the other 90. I don't know, did I answer the question?
I think you did.
Yeah.
Any final comment or thought here? Well, Terry will follow you. Bill.
Hi, Bill.
I've read the book, okay?
You have?
No, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm not a pastor anymore, so. I remember, are you trying to revisit being in a faithful church? I remember that exercise, what is it, 10 years ago, something like that. The wordiness of that, and I tried to visualize that spreading into Winkler and Gordon and all over. What is it? You know, I hope you revisited some of those issues. And
So so your question is, does this book resemble some of the process and thinking that Mennonite Church Canada went through or articulated in the Being a Faithful Church process?
well, I sometimes wish or thought can be do a bit more than on some of that, or you know, why didn't it work? Some of that, and so cutting down. I like this, and I like what your kids are telling you. My kids say the same. Anyway.
Well, just a very quick answer. This book does not address any one particular issue very extensively, no. What it does try to do is recapture from Scripture what I think is there in terms of what it means to be the church. So it's not, like I said, it's not my vision, it's not these vision, I'm trying to recapture and summarize and clarify from the scriptural text itself what. Well, maybe, I hope so. I mean, I had a very interesting experience the first week this was out. I got a call from a professor who's teaching a course on church and ministry and university. And he said he and his co-teacher have decided to make this required reading. And when I asked him why, he said, you won't believe this, but most books on ecclesiology have no Bible in it. Most textbooks. And this one does. So they liked it because this actually tries to open up that area. But I think that's a signal of where we're at in the 21st century. It's ecclesiology without the Bible and Bible without ecclesiology. Both are very, very dominant in our ways of understanding the faith these days.
Terry.
I'm not sure I have this very well framed, but I was appreciative of your comments towards the end here. The scriptural vision for God's people energizes. It's big and it has possibility, and yet at the same time, you point to the reality that you fear that vision is falling on hard ground. It isn't necessarily to be assumed as being a lot. And my question is maybe a little bit like your example from Chile. If only we would stop gossiping, we would open up possibility. That kind. So I'm looking for a simple answer, but I'm just curious as you reflect on the North American, this time, this context, this place, and the reality of a vision not necessarily being grabbed. What wisdom might the church attend to try to recapture, to re-enter that? I'm not sure if that's very clear, but I'm curious about that from your perspective.
Given the current contextual space we are in as a North American church, what is it that we best need to recapture the vision, the biblical vision that you have helped clarify?
Well, I'm kind of strange on that. I mean, I see parts and pieces of this vision being fostered and promoted kind of everywhere. Not necessarily always through the church, or sometimes even opposed by the church. For example, the Me Too movement. In some ways, is part of the vision of wholeness and healing that is part of the biblical vision of restoration of creation. Or we turn on the TV and watch the stuff about the environment and climate change and ecology. This is so much part of the biblical vision of restoring all things, reconciling all things, Ephesians 1:10. Or what is happening, the articulation of sin in terms of the residential schools. This is so much part of the vision that we find already there in terms of what it means to be the people of God, or means to be the church. Or when we talk about, creating the budget for Canada, or creating the budget for the United Nations, it's amazing how much attention, at least in words, there is to the marginalized, the poor, which is so much part of the vision that is outlined in the Bible. And so there is just evidence everywhere of the wisdom of this vision. That this vision is being caught way beyond the walls of the church. And it enhances what is here in the text, not in this text, in the biblical text. It enhances what is there because it shows that what is there is right, makes sense. It makes sense to people in their daily walk and in their daily lives. And it makes sense in international affairs, and it makes sense in international relationships, in how you organize the world and how you organize society and how you organize life. And so every time I see that and hear those arguments and hear those explanations, I always think, well, my God, this is God at work. And so I think sometimes what the church needs to do, well, first of all, is to wake up to what is already happening and then to align with it and to be bold and courageous with it and then to even go beyond it, because none of these movements are perfect either. None of them do the whole thing. And so you continue to walk, journey on and on.
So Pope Francis has said he will come to Canada to speak into the residential school experience. So that's a very specific Canadian contextual piece.
Right.
Lauren Brandt is asking, what would you like the Pope to say or do with respect? Can you, like, is there a vision? Can you articulate the vision for that particular kind of a
Encounter?
contextual question?
For that encounter?
Yeah. And that'll be our final question.
Yeah. I think something that would, I mean, it's in the right direction. It's moving ahead. My own preference when I look at the vision that is in the text and when I look at what's being planned is that I wish he would go beyond offering an apology, which I think is basic. Offering apology, I wish he would ask for forgiveness. And that would be moving this vision forward even beyond what I think he's contemplating. But I think it's profoundly scriptural to do so. You can apologize without forgiveness. And that doesn't mean that the Indigenous people have to grant forgiveness. They don't. But I think it would be a massive witness to the world if he would ask for it. That's just an idea.
Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your engagement tonight. It's been a good conversation. Thank you, Doug. Thank you, Ray, Moses, and Janet for your contributions, for being here. And let's give Jack another round of applause. Thank you, Daryl at the back. I have a comment from afar asking for you to pan out. You've seen it already. Thank you. And some people wanting to see our full background and the full picture behind us. This program has been recorded and will be available at commonword.ca. For those of you here in person, copies of the book, of course, will be available to purchase from Common Word. Jack will be at the table to sign your copy. Others of you, as I said before, can access a physical copy or the PDF version from commonword.ca. The church, we are reminded, is a people. There is a free of charge, yes, the PDF itself is free of charge. That is right. The church, as we were reminded, is a peoplehood, called, equipped, and sent by God. May we each live into that vision, that biblical vision, inspired by the Spirit who joins us together. I wish you all safety and good health and a good night. Thanks so much for coming.